Welcome to Whispers After Midnight. Tonight's story is one of silence, hunger, and a slow, burning reckoning. From childhood, he fed his master's dogs with obedient hands, day after day, never questioning his place, until one night when desperation met courage, and the meal changed everything. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you value carefully researched, true stories like this, stories that take countless hours to verify names, dates, and forgotten records, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support keeps these real histories alive and uncovered. He was born into a world where choice did not exist. From the moment he could remember, life was already decided for him, where he would sleep, when he would wake, what his hands would be used for. He did not learn his own name before he learned obedience. The first sounds that shaped his childhood were not lullabies or laughter, but commands barked across a yard and the growls of dogs waiting to be fed. Adults around him spoke about him, rarely to him, as if he were another tool stored beside the shed or the kennel. His earliest memories were of dirt under bare feet and cold mornings when breath turned white in the air. While other children learned games, he learned roots, how to walk from the quarters to the kennel without spilling a single scrap, how to keep his eyes lowered, how to move quickly enough to avoid punishment, but slowly enough not to appear careless. Hunger was not an occasional visitor. It was a permanent resident. He learned early that the smell of meat did not mean food for him. It meant work. The dogs ate before he did. Always. That rule was never written, never questioned. Thick bowls filled with scraps, bones, and leftovers were carried carefully in his small hands while his own stomach twisted in protest. Sometimes the dogs snapped inches from his fingers, teeth flashing, saliva dripping. No one intervened. Fear was considered part of his training. If he cried, he learned to do it silently. Noise attracted attention, and attention brought consequences. As he grew, so did his understanding of the world's imbalance. He noticed how the dogs were valued, praised, protected, how injuries to them caused anger, while injuries to him were ignored. He noticed how the master's voice softened when speaking to the hounds, but hardened when addressing people like him. These observations planted something dangerous inside a young mind: awareness. Awareness that he mattered less than animals. Awareness that obedience was expected, but humanity was not granted. Yet he survived by becoming invisible. He listened more than he spoke. He remembered everything: faces, routines, habits, times when the household slept deeply and times when it stayed awake late. Childhood for him was not innocence. It was preparation. Each day taught him patience. Each insult taught him restraint. Each missed meal taught him endurance. By the time he reached adolescence, feeding the dogs was no longer just a chore. It was a symbol, a daily reminder of his place at the bottom of a rigid hierarchy. But it was also the one task that placed him alone, unsupervised, with access to something powerful. He did not yet know what he would do with that access. He only knew that years of silence were stacking up inside him, heavier than the bowls he carried. This is where his story truly begins, not on the night everything changed, but in those early years, when a child learned that survival sometimes requires waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the dark. Waiting for a chance that might only come once. Feeding the hounds was not simply a task. It was a ceremony repeated with cruel precision, morning and night, every single day. The rhythm never changed. At dawn, before the sun fully lifted itself over the land, he was expected to be at the kennel. At dusk, when shadows stretched long and the air cooled, he returned again. The routine was enforced not with written rules, but with memory and fear. Miss a feeding, spill a bowl, arrive too late, and punishment followed swiftly and without explanation. The bowls were heavy, especially when he was young. Thick, chipped metal that cut into his palms when he carried them too long. Inside were scraps from the master's table, bones stripped, nearly clean, gristle, bread soaked in grace, meat that still smelled rich and warm. The scent followed him, clinging to his clothes, his skin, his breath. It was a smell that promised relief but delivered none. He learned to walk carefully, eyes fixed on the ground, because looking too long at the food only made the hunger worse. The dog sensed his arrival before he reached the gate. Low growls would rise, tails thudding against wooden walls, claws scraping dirt in anticipation. They knew him. To them, he was not a child, not a person. He was the hand that brought sustenance. Sometimes they circled him, teeth bared, daring him to hesitate. He was warned early never to show fear. Fear excited them. Fear made them aggressive. So he learned to control his breathing, to move steadily, to place the bowls down without trembling. No one supervised these moments, and that solitude was intentional. If he were bitten, it would be considered his fault. If a dog went hungry, it would be his responsibility. The master valued the hounds as extensions of his authority, guardians, weapons, symbols of dominance. Feeding them was an act of maintaining power, and the burden of that power was placed on the smallest, weakest shoulders available. Over time, the ritual became etched into his body. His hands remembered the weight even before they touched the bowls. His feet knew every stone along the path. He could tell by the sound of a growl which dog was restless, which one was sick, which one might attack if startled. This knowledge was never acknowledged, never praised. It was simply expected. What hurt most was not just the hunger, but the order of things. He was expected to serve animals before being allowed to think of himself. Sometimes, after the feeding, he would sit alone behind the kennel fence, watching the dogs tear into the food, grease dripping from their mouths, bellies filling. Only later, if at all, would he be given something small to eat. On bad days, nothing came. On worse days, he was told he should be grateful to be useful. Yet within that ritual, something subtle began to form. Repetition breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds understanding. He began to notice patterns, how certain ingredients made the dogs sluggish, how others made them restless, how timing affected their behavior. These were observations made quietly, without intention at first. Just a mind occupying itself to survive the monotony. Feeding the hounds shaped him more than anyone realized. It taught him discipline, silence, and control. But it also gave him proximity to power, dangerous power, twice a day, every day. What began as a symbol of his submission slowly transformed into the one moment where he stood alone at the center of consequence. And though no one noticed it at the time, this ritual was laying the groundwork for the night when the routine would finally be broken. Hunger followed him like a shadow, quiet, persistent, impossible to escape. It was there when he woke and still there when he tried to sleep, curling inside his stomach like something alive. He did not remember a time when he felt full. Fullness was a concept he heard others speak about, never something he experienced himself. Food was measured, controlled, and distributed according to worth, and he learned early that his worth ranked low. Meals were irregular and small, often whatever remained after everyone else had eaten, or nothing at all. Some days he survived on scraps handed to him, without ceremony, tossed aside as if feeding an afterthought. Other days he was told to wait, and waiting became a test of endurance. The body adapts to starvation in cruel ways. At first, hunger screams. Later it whispers. Eventually it becomes a dull ache that never leaves, a constant reminder that survival is conditional. The smell of food was its own form of torture. It drifted from the house in waves, roasted meat, fresh bread, warm fat sizzling over fire. His body reacted instinctively, mouth filling with saliva, legs weakening, vision narrowing. But he trained himself not to react outwardly. Wanting was dangerous. Wanting suggested disobedience. He learned to swallow the craving along with his pride. Hunger sharpened his senses. When the body lacks nourishment, the mind compensates. He noticed details others overlooked. The way footsteps sounded heavier after a large meal, how moods softened when bellies were full, how cruelty often followed indulgence. Hunger taught him timing. It taught him patience. It taught him how long a human being could function on almost nothing. There were moments when hunger blurred the line between pain and thought. Dizziness would wash over him while he worked, the world tilting slightly as if unsteady. His hands sometimes shook when he carried the bulls to the kennel, not from fear, but from weakness. And yet, he never collapsed. He could not afford to. Collapse meant attention, and attention rarely brought kindness. The deepest cruelty was feeding the dogs while starving himself. Watching them eat was a lesson repeated twice a day. Nourishment was available, but not for him. The dogs grew strong and alert, their coats glossy, their muscles firm. He grew lean, then thin, then fragile, looking, but still expected to work the same, move the same, endure the same. Hunger was not seen as a problem to be solved, but as a condition he deserved. Over time, hunger became more than a physical state. It became emotional, psychological, a hunger for fairness, a hunger for acknowledgement, a hunger to be seen as human. Each denial added weight to an invisible scale, tipping it slowly, day by day. He did not yet know what would happen when that scale finally broke, but hunger was quietly preparing him for it. Because hunger does by dangerous to a person. It strips away illusions. It clarifies what matters and what does not. And in his case, it planted a single, unshakable understanding deep in his bones. If survival was denied to him by design, then one day, survival might have to be taken. The master's household functioned like a machine, smooth on the surface, merciless underneath. Every person, every animal, every object had an assigned place, and deviation was treated as a threat to order. The house itself stood as a symbol of control, solid walls, wide rooms, polished floors that reflected light and authority. Inside, voices carried weight. Outside, silence was expected. He existed on the edge of that world, close enough to serve it, never close enough to belong to it. Rules were not posted, but everyone knew them. Speak only when spoken to. Move quickly, but never run. Keep your eyes lowered. Do not ask questions. Do not linger. The master did not need to repeat himself. His reputation did the work for him. Discipline was unpredictable, and that uncertainty kept everyone obedient. Some days passed quietly. Others ended in punishment for offenses no one fully understood. Consistency was a privilege reserved for those in power. The household ran on appearances. Guests were greeted with smiles, warm meals, and polite conversation. Laughter echoed through rooms. He was not allowed to enter unless summoned. From the outside, it looked respectable, even admirable. But behind closed doors, hierarchy ruled everything. Kindness was selective. Cruelty was private, and those at the bottom were expected to absorb it without complaint. He learned quickly how moods shaped the house. A good day meant fewer orders barked in anger, fewer eyes watching his movements. A bad day meant tension thick in the air, voices sharp, patience non-existent. He became skilled at reading signs, the way doors closed too hard, the way footsteps struck the floor, the tone used when calling his name. Anticipation became a survival skill. The master himself was a presence more than a person. When he entered a space, conversations shifted, bodies straightened, silence followed. The dogs reacted instantly, alert and eager, reinforcing the power dynamic without words. The master valued loyalty, but only when it flowed upward. Obedience was expected, gratitude was demanded, and mercy was rare. Praise, when given, was usually directed at possessions, land, animals, tools, never at people like him. Within this household, labor defined worth. He was useful, therefore tolerated. Invisible, therefore safe for now. His existence depended on maintaining that balance. Too noticeable, and he risked punishment. Too slow, and he risked replacement. The household did not see him as a growing child, a thinking mind, or a feeling heart. It saw function. Yet living so close to power gave him something, unintended knowledge. He saw who argued and who submitted. He saw who was protected and who was blamed. He saw how quickly rules bent for some and hardened for others. These observations stacked quietly inside him, forming a map of the household's weaknesses and rhythms. The master's household believed control was absolute. It believed routines could never be broken, that fear was enough to hold everything in place. What it failed to understand was this: by forcing him to live inside its walls, to serve its needs, to observe its habits day after day, it was unknowingly teaching him how the system worked and how it might one day fail. Silence became his first language. Long before he understood the power of words, he understood the danger of using them. Speaking drew attention invited judgment. Judgment often ended in punishment. So he learned to listen instead, to stand still, to blend into corners, to make himself smaller than the space he occupied. Silence was not weakness, it was armor. From the time he was young, he watched everything. He watched faces tighten before anger exploded. He watched hands clench before strikes landed. He watched smiles that never reached the eyes. Observation was safer than participation. While others spoke carelessly, he stored details away, building an internal record of how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Patience was forced upon him, but over time it became deliberate. He learned that reacting quickly only made things worse. If he was insulted, he lowered his gaze. If he was blamed unfairly, he accepted it without protest. Each swallowed response felt like a small defeat, but it also bought him another day of survival. He began to understand timing. Not everything needed an answer immediately. Some things waited. Some things grew. In silence, his thoughts grew louder. While his body worked, his mind moved freely. He replayed conversations he overheard, piecing together meaning from fragments. He learned which threats were empty and which ones were real. He learned who followed rules strictly and who bent them when convenient. This quiet analysis gave him something most people around him lacked: clarity. Patience sharpened his control over himself. Hunger, fear, anger, these emotions surged inside him daily, but he learned to restrain them. Restraint was necessary. A single outburst could undo years of endurance. So he practiced control in small ways: steady breathing, measured movements, a calm expression even when his chest burned with rage. He became reliable in appearance, predictable in behavior. That predictability made others careless around him. People talked freely in his presence, assuming silence meant ignorance. They underestimated him because he did not challenge them. They forgot he was there, and being forgotten was powerful. He heard plans spoken openly, complaints whispered late at night, careless remarks about what mattered most to the household. None of it was meant for him, but all of it stayed with him. Waiting taught him something critical: moments of change are rare, but they always announced themselves quietly first. A shift in routine. A lapse in supervision. A mistake made by someone confident they are untouchable. He did not know what form that moment would take, only that it would come. And when it did, impatience would ruin everything. So he waited. He listened. He remembered. Each silent day added another layer to his resolve. The world around him believed his quiet obedience meant acceptance. They were wrong. Silence was not surrender, it was preparation. The dogs were never just animals. From the beginning, they were symbols, living, breathing extensions of the master's authority. Their presence alone commanded fear. Trained to obey instantly, to attack without hesitation, they were reminders that violence was always ready. When the dogs were near, people lowered their voices, adjusted their posture, watched their steps. Power moved on four legs and bared its teeth openly. They were fed better than most people on the property. Their coats shone, their bodies were strong, their injuries treated with urgency. When a dog fell ill, concern spread quickly through the household. When a person like him grew weak or injured, it was ignored or dismissed as inconvenience. That imbalance was not accidental, it was intentional. The dogs were valued because they protected the system. He was expendable because he did not. The master spoke to the hounds with familiarity, even affection. Commands were sharp but purposeful. Praise was given freely when they performed well. In those moments, the dogs were not just tools, they were trusted partners. Watching this taught him a painful lesson: loyalty was rewarded, but only when it came from something considered worthy. He saw how easily compassion could exist alongside cruelty, depending on the recipient. The dogs enforced fear without words. No explanation was needed when they were present. Their growls, their alert stances, the way they tracked movement, all of it reinforced the rules of the household. Even when the master was absent, the dogs maintained control. They were living warnings, reminders that defiance had consequences. Over time, he came to understand their role with unsettling clarity. The dogs did not choose their purpose. They were trained into it, shaped by reward and punishment, just like him. The difference was that their obedience was celebrated, while his was demanded. That realization complicated his feelings. He did not hate them, not truly. In some ways, he recognized himself in them. Creatures conditioned to serve power without question. Yet the dogs held a unique position. They were both feared and protected, both dangerous and valued. That made them central to the household's balance. Any disruption involving them would echo loudly. Any change to their behavior would be noticed immediately. They were not background elements, they were pillars of control. As he continued feeding them day after day, he understood something no one else seemed to consider. If power relied so heavily on these animals, then those animals were also a vulnerability. The system trusted them absolutely. Trusted their training, trusted their routine, trusted the hand that fed them, and that trust, unquestioned, habitual, blind, was dangerous. Because symbols of power, once disturbed, do not just break rules. They shake the entire structure that depends on them. That night did not announce itself with thunder or raised voices. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine. The same sky hung overhead. The same path led to the kennel. The same bowls waited to be filled. On the surface, nothing was different, and that was what made it dangerous. Change, he had learned, rarely comes screaming. It slips in when everyone is confident nothing ever will. From the moment he woke, something felt off. Not fear exactly, but a tightening awareness, like the air before a storm. The household moved through its motions without noticing him, without noticing anything at all. Laughter drifted from inside the house. The master was distracted, occupied, satisfied. Supervision was looser than usual. Eyes that normally tracked every movement looked elsewhere. Routine protected the system, but it also made it careless. He had walked this path thousands of times. His body knew every step without thought. That familiarity gave him cover. No one questioned why he moved when he did, or how long he took. Tonight, predictability became invisibility. As dusk deepened, shadows stretched longer than usual. Sounds seemed sharper, the clink of metal, the scrape of a door, the low breathing of the dogs as they sensed feeding time approaching. His heart beat steadily, not fast. Panic would have betrayed him. He had waited too long for this moment to waste it on fear. There was a subtle shift in him as well. Years of silence, hunger, and observation had led to this exact point. Nothing sudden had pushed him here. No single insult, no single act of cruelty. This night was a result of accumulation, the weight of countless days pressing down until stillness became impossible. He realized, with strange clarity, that if he did nothing, tomorrow would be exactly the same, and the day after that, and the years after that. This night was not special because of what happened around him. It was special because of what had finally settled inside him. Acceptance had ended. Waiting had reached its limit. The dogs stirred as he approached, sensing him as they always did. To them, this was just another feeding. That assumption wrapped him in a fragile safety. The master's power rested on that assumption too, that routines were eternal, that obedience was permanent, that people like him never changed. This was the night those assumptions would be tested. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. Every movement was deliberate, practiced in his mind long before his hands carried it out. The darkness gave him cover, but confidence gave him control. Whatever happened next, there would be no undoing it. The night was different not because it broke the routine, but because it used the routine against itself. The decision was not made in a single heartbeat. It had been forming for years, layered quietly beneath obedience and silence. But on that night, in the darkness, it finally solidified. This was the moment when thought turned into intent, when imagining crossed an invisible line and became resolve. He stood alone with the bowls, listening to the steady sounds of the household settling in for the night. Doors closed. Voices faded. Laughter dissolved into muffled quiet. These sounds mattered. They told him how much time he had, how deeply everyone else believed the world was still under their control. Darkness did not frighten him anymore. It felt familiar, almost protective. He had lived his entire life in unseen spaces. What made the decision terrifying was not the act itself, but its permanence. Once done, there would be no return to routine, no slipping back into invisibility. He understood that clearly. This choice would either end his suffering or redefine it entirely. Either way, the version of him that had endured silently would no longer exist by morning. Fear tried to speak. It reminded him of punishment, of pain, of what happened to those who disrupted order. But hunger spoke louder. Memory spoke louder. Every ignored wound, every empty stomach, every night spent knowing he mattered less than animals, those voices drowned fear out completely. This was not impulse. It was balance finally tipping. He reviewed everything one last time, calmly, methodically, timing. Access. Habit. The dogs trusted the hand that fed them. The household trusted the dogs. The master trusted the routine. Each layer rested on the one beneath it, never questioning what held it up. He was not attacking power directly. He was stepping into the space power had overlooked. What surprised him most was how steady his hands were. No shaking. No hesitation. His breathing remained slow, controlled, the same way he had trained himself during years of restraint. This calm was not mercy, it was clarity. Emotion would have ruined everything. Control was essential. In that moment, he did not feel hatred. Hatred was loud and reckless. What he felt was finality, a quiet understanding that waiting had served its purpose, and waiting any longer would only mean accepting a life already proven unbearable. The system had given him no future. Tonight he was choosing uncertainty over certainty. The decision locked into place without ceremony. No dramatic vow. No spoken words. Just action prepared to follow thought. The darkness held him as he moved, as if it too understood that something irreversible had begun. Once the decision was made, the fear faded almost entirely. That was the most unsettling part. When a person reaches the point where consequences no longer outweigh continuation, the act itself becomes inevitable. And from that moment on, everything he did was no longer preparation. It was execution. What he added to the meal was never spoken of clearly, not then and not later. That silence mattered. Some details, once named, become instructions, and this was not a story meant to be repeated, only understood. What mattered was not the substance itself, but the intention behind it and the weight of what it represented. The bowls looked the same as they always had. Metal worn thin by years of use, food arranged in the familiar way. To anyone watching, nothing would have seemed out of place. That was the power of routine. It masked change better than darkness ever could. The dogs would not hesitate. They never did. Trust had been built carefully over a lifetime. As he worked, his mind did not race. It focused. Every movement was precise, economical, stripped of hesitation. This was not an act of rage or spectacle. It was quiet, controlled, almost clinical. He understood that whatever he placed in those bowls would not just affect the dogs, it would ripple outward, touching every structure of power built around them. What he added was small in appearance, but enormous in consequence. It turned nourishment into a question mark. It transformed obedience into uncertainty. For the first time, the food did not simply sustain the system, it challenged it. And that was the point. The household believed control flowed in one direction only. Tonight, that belief was being tested. He did not linger once the bowls were prepared. Lingering invited doubt. Doubt weakened resolve. Instead, he followed the routine exactly as expected, down to the smallest detail. The dogs reacted as they always did, eager, impatient, unquestioning. That familiarity shielded him. Trust, once absolute, is blind. As he placed the bowls down, there was a brief, almost unbearable stillness inside him. Not regret, reflection. He understood that by changing the meal, he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Whatever happened next would no longer belong solely to him. It would belong to consequences, to reactions, to forces larger than any one person. He stepped back, just as he always had. No one was watching. No alarm was raised. The night accepted the act without protest. In that moment, the simplicity of it all was unsettling. Years of suffering, of silence, of endurance, compressed into a single, irreversible alteration. The dogs began to eat. And with that, the most stable pillar of the master's power was no longer stable at all. Once the bowls were set down and the routine completed, the world did not change immediately. That was the most unsettling part. No shouts, no alarms, no sudden realization. The household remained wrapped in its confidence, unaware that something fundamental had already shifted beneath it. Consequences, he understood, rarely arrive at the same moment as actions. They travel, they gather force, then they strike. At first, the signs were subtle, easily dismissed, easily misread. Restlessness where there was usually discipline, confusion where there was normally precision. The dogs, once predictable extensions of authority, no longer behaved exactly as expected. That disruption alone was enough to unsettle the balance. The household relied on certainty. Anything uncertain felt dangerous. As awareness spread, fear followed close behind. Fear does not need full understanding to take hold. It only needs the sense that control is slipping. Voices rose. Orders were repeated more sharply than before. The master's confidence wavered, not openly, but enough to be felt. When power senses vulnerability, it often responds with aggression. Blame began to search for a target. Questions were asked too late. Who had been near the kennel? Who had last handled the food? Who was responsible? Suspicion moved quickly down the hierarchy, as it always did, settling where it was most convenient. He had expected this. Consequences, after all, are rarely fair. They are efficient. What followed was chaos disguised as discipline. Rules were enforced more harshly. Punishments became public. The household tried to reassert dominance through force, but force could not undo what had already been set in motion. Once trust breaks, it does not reform easily. The dogs had been symbols of control. Now they were reminders of fragility. For him, the consequences were immediate and internal as well. There was no relief, no triumph, only a cold understanding that survival had entered a new phase. He was no longer invisible. The role he had played for so long was gone. Whatever came next would be louder, more dangerous, and impossible to navigate with silence alone. Yet beneath the fear and disorder, something irreversible had occurred. The master's authority no longer felt absolute. The household had seen proof, however unclear, that its foundations could be shaken by the very system it trusted most. That knowledge could not be erased. Consequences continued to unfold in ways no one could fully control. Some were expected. Others were not. But the most important consequence had already taken root. The illusion of total power was broken. And once an illusion breaks, every action afterward is shaped by the memory of that fracture. Fear spread faster than truth ever could. It moved through the household in fragments, half-seen moments, raised voices, hurried footsteps in the dark. No one understood exactly what had happened at first, only that something was wrong. Chaos does not need clarity to thrive, it feeds on uncertainty, and uncertainty had suddenly taken root everywhere. Shouts cut through the night, sharp and disordered, nothing like the controlled commands that once ruled the property. Lamps were lit hastily, doors thrown open, routines abandoned. The master's voice carried anger, but beneath it was something far more dangerous, panic. Power that is confident is precise. Power that is afraid is erratic. People gathered without instruction, drawn by instinct rather than order. Eyes darted. Whispers collided. Accusations surfaced before facts. Everyone felt the shift, even if they could not name it. The system that once moved like clockwork now stumbled over itself, reacting instead of commanding. Discovery came in pieces, never all at once. Each new realization deepened the confusion. The dogs, once symbols of unquestioned control, were now at the center of alarm. That alone was unthinkable. For years, they had represented certainty, enforcement, dominance. Seeing that certainty fail shook the household to its core. Fear sharpened cruelty. In moments like this, the powerful often reach for punishment as proof they are still in control. Orders were barked. Blame was assigned quickly, carelessly. The need to find a cause outweighed the need to understand it. Chaos demands a culprit, and discovery rarely protects the innocent. For him, this was the most dangerous phase. Confusion made people unpredictable. Silence, which had once kept him safe, now drew attention. Every glance felt heavier. Every question carried threat. He understood that discovery did not require proof, only suspicion. And suspicion always flowed downward. Yet even in the midst of panic, something else surfaced: disbelief. The household struggled to accept that its own structure had allowed this to happen. That realization was almost more frightening than the event itself. Systems built on absolute authority do not tolerate the idea of internal failure. As the night wore on, chaos settled into a tense, uneasy order. Not the old order, something brittle, forced, and fragile. Discovery had not restored control, it had exposed weakness. And everyone felt it, even those who pretended they did not. The fear did not fade with the darkness. It lingered, thick and unresolved, marking the moment when the household learned that power, once shaken, never returns exactly as it was. What happened afterward was shaped as much by silence as by action. Official accounts, if they existed at all, were careful, selective in detail, cautious in blame. Stories changed depending on who told them and who was listening. Some details were emphasized, others quietly disappeared. In places built on control, truth is often treated as a threat that must be managed. There were explanations offered that felt convenient rather than complete. Accidents, misjudgments, unfortunate circumstances. Words chosen to close doors instead of open them. The household needed stability restored, and stability required a narrative that did not invite questions. So questions were discouraged. Memory was edited. Those at the top moved quickly to protect the image of authority. Records were altered or never created. Witnesses were scattered. Conversations were shortened. The goal was not understanding, it was containment. Whatever had happened could not be allowed to suggest that the system itself was flawed. Better to bury uncertainty than let it grow. For those who lived through it, the truth survived in fragments, in glances that lingered too long, in routines that were quietly changed, in rules that grew tighter without explanation. People remembered what they felt more clearly than what they were told. Fear has a longer memory than facts. As time passed, the event became a rumor rather than a record. A cautionary whisper shared late at night, a story that began with, "They say," and ended without names. Each retelling smoothed the edges, softened the cause, blurred responsibility. That blurring was intentional. When no one can point to the truth, no one can challenge power with it. Yet the truth was never fully erased. It lived in absence, in the way certain practices stopped abruptly, in the way trust never fully returned, in the way authority felt heavier, more brittle than before. Even buried truths exert pressure. They shape behavior long after words are gone. For him, legacy was never about recognition. There would be no acknowledgement, no justice, no clean ending. What remained was impact without credit, change without confession. The system moved on, but it moved differently, and that difference was the proof that something real had occurred. Truth, buried or revealed, always leaves a mark. Even when hidden, it alters the ground above it. And those who walk that ground feel it, uneven, unsettled, long after the story is officially declared over. Long after the household returned to something resembling order, the story refused to die. It did not survive in books or records, but in whispers, quiet, careful, incomplete. People spoke of it late at night, when certainty felt less solid and the past pressed closer. No one ever told it straight through. It emerged in pieces, shaped by fear, guilt, and caution, as if speaking it too clearly might summon consequences again. The name of the one who caused the fracture was rarely mentioned. When it was, it came without detail, stripped of context, reduced to a shadow. He became less a person and more a warning, a reminder that silence does not always mean acceptance, and obedience does not always mean loyalty. In places built on control, such reminders are dangerous. Over time, the story changed. Some versions painted him as reckless. others as desperate. A few, spoken only in the safest company, hinted at something else entirely. Quiet resistance, long endurance, a breaking point reached not in anger but in clarity. Each version revealed more about the teller than about him. Fear distorts memory. Power reshapes narrative. What endured most was not the act itself, but its effect. The household was never quite the same. Routines tightened. Trust thinned. Authority grew louder, harsher, as if volume could replace certainty. Those who came later sensed something beneath the rules, an old fracture sealed, but never healed. They obeyed, but with a different kind of caution. His legacy was never carved into stone. It lived instead in behavior, in how people hesitated before assuming someone's silence meant nothing, in how routines were watched more closely, in how power no longer felt invulnerable. He had proven something without ever saying it aloud. Even the smallest, most overlooked presence can alter the course of a system that believes itself untouchable. Midnight became the hour when the story resurfaced most often. Not because of superstition, but because darkness invites honesty. In the quiet, away from daylight authority, people remembered differently. They spoke more carefully. They acknowledged, if only to themselves, that what happened was not random. It was the result of years, not a moment. And so the story endures, not as a tale of revenge, but as a whisper of consequence. A reminder passed down, without instruction, without detail, without names. Just an understanding that some changes begin in silence, move through darkness, and are only ever fully spoken after midnight.